This is the moment America's reputation as the world's undefeatable military superpower was permanently damaged, and the people responsible are still telling you it was a victory. If you look at the situation on the ground right now, here is what you will see. You will see a 14-day ceasefire that both sides are calling a win, while the cameras show burning oil facilities outside Tehran, shuttered American embassies across the Gulf, and a U.S. president refreshing his phone, waiting for a peace deal that has not arrived. You will see the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway America spent billions trying to control, still partially restricted. You will see Gulf states that were America's closest partners quietly opening new conversations with Beijing. As of this week, Saturday, April 18, 2026, the United States has spent 47 days in an active military conflict against Iran, a conflict that began on February 28th with the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, promised to end in days, and has instead dragged the most powerful military on earth into the one outcome every serious strategist warned about: a war of attrition it cannot win by force alone. America launched this war with 50,000 troops in the region, 2 carrier strike groups, and the most advanced air force in human history. Iran launched this war with something more dangerous than any of that. Iran launched this war with a doctrine, and that doctrine, outlast, absorb, and embarrass, is working in ways that no Pentagon briefing has been honest enough to admit publicly. In this breakdown, we are going to show you the 4 ways Iran has already transformed America into a historic losing force. We are going to reveal what was said inside the White House when the plan started falling apart. We are going to explain the strategic catastrophe that is unfolding in slow motion across 3 continents. And we are going to tell you why, regardless of how this ceasefire ends, the damage to American power has already been done and cannot be undone. America did not just stumble into a difficult war. America walked into a trap, and Iran built it decades ago. 6 weeks ago, the White House had a plan. It was bold, it was fast, and it was built on one core assumption that turned out to be completely wrong. The plan was called Operation Assured Response. The idea was precise and confident. Hit the Iranian leadership on day 1, eliminate Khamenei, destroy the nuclear sites, paralyze the IRGC command structure within 72 hours, and watch the regime collapse from the inside. It was supposed to be surgical. It was supposed to be over before the world had time to react. Officials privately told allies it would be the cleanest military intervention since the Gulf War in 1991. The Trump administration had reasons to believe this would work. Israel had spent 18 months systematically dismantling Iran's proxy network. Hamas was gone. Hezbollah was severely weakened. The Houthis had taken enormous punishment. Iran's axis of resistance was at its lowest point in 2 decades. The Iranian currency had collapsed by 60% in December 2025. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent publicly called that currency collapse the grand culmination of the maximum pressure campaign. Every economic indicator said Iran was on the edge of breaking, but the hidden assumption underneath all of this was the most dangerous one. The White House assumed that killing the supreme leader would cause the system to collapse. They assumed Iran was a one-man regime. They assumed that without Khamenei, the machinery of the Islamic Republic would seize up, the Revolutionary Guards would fracture, and ordinary Iranians, exhausted by sanctions, protests, and economic pain, would finally rise up and finish the job. The Pentagon had war-gamed this scenario dozens of times over 2 decades. Every single war game reached the same conclusion. Iran does not collapse when you cut off the head. It adapts, it disperses, it survives, and then it fights back from every direction simultaneously. The president was told this. He chose to go anyway. And on February 28, 2026, the bombs started falling, and the plan started failing almost immediately. At 2:14 in the morning on February 28, 2026, American and Israeli warplanes hit over 100 targets across Iran in the opening salvo. The strikes were extraordinary in their precision. Nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan were hit. Senior military commanders were killed. Khamenei himself was killed in a strike on a compound in Tehran. By dawn, the White House was declaring that the operation had achieved its primary objectives. For exactly 11 hours, it looked like the plan was working. Then Iran did something the planners had modeled, but apparently not taken seriously enough. Iran activated every front simultaneously. Ballistic missiles launched from Iranian territory struck U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, all four in the same 90-minute window. The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which hosts the largest American air presence in the Middle East, took direct hits. Power and water desalination plants in Kuwait went dark. Oil facilities in Abu Dhabi reported fires from drone debris as Emirati air defenses scrambled to intercept the incoming swarm. The King Fahd Causeway, connecting Saudi Arabia to Bahrain, was shut to all traffic as a precautionary emergency measure. While the Gulf was burning, the Strait of Hormuz was closing. Iran announced the strait was shut to all shipping from nations it deemed hostile, cutting off approximately 20% of the world's daily oil supply within hours of the first strike. Global oil prices spiked 18% in a single trading session, the largest single-day oil price movement since the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. The Dow Jones futures dropped 3.2% before American markets even opened that morning. While Hormuz was shutting and the Gulf was under missile attack, Hezbollah opened a new front from southern Lebanon. Despite 18 months of Israeli degradation, Hezbollah retained enough capability to launch rocket salvos that forced Israel to expand its air campaign northward into Beirut's southern suburbs and the Bekaa Valley. While Israel was absorbing that pressure, the Houthis in Yemen launched ballistic missiles at Israeli territory, a signal that the axis of resistance, declared dead by many analysts, had not been fully extinguished. It had simply been waiting. Pause. 4 simultaneous fronts. Missiles hitting 4 different countries. Oil markets in freefall, the Strait closed, and the regime in Tehran, rather than collapsing, had already appointed Khamenei's son Mojtaba to the supreme leadership position within 48 hours of his father's death. The decapitation had not decapitated anything. The head had simply been replaced. Meanwhile, Iran's operational commanders, dispersed, buried deep, and operating on pre-distributed orders, continued directing the response without a single hour of meaningful disruption. American officials had assumed killing the leadership would paralyze the command structure. It turned out the command structure had been built specifically to function without centralized leadership. Iran had been preparing for this moment since 1979. How the operations alone cost the U.S. military over $1 billion in 3 weeks just to defend against. American destroyers were firing $2 million missiles to shoot down $20,000 Iranian drones, a cost exchange ratio that any accountant, let alone any military strategist, would describe as catastrophic. What happened inside the White House in the first week of the war has not been fully reported, but sources familiar with internal deliberations, speaking to journalists in Washington and London, have described a decision-making environment that was almost immediately consumed by damage control rather than strategic execution. According to leaks from senior administration officials who spoke to 3 separate outlets on background, the president's war objectives changed not once, not twice, but at least 5 times in the first 14 days. The initial objective was eliminating the nuclear program. Then it became regime change. Then it became degrading Iran's missile capability. Then it became securing the Strait. Then it became simply finding an exit that could be framed as a victory. Sources in the National Security Council describe a president who had been told the war would be over in days. When day 5 came and Iran was still firing on 4 fronts, he reportedly told advisors in a private session that he wanted to know who had given him the timeline. The mood in the room, according to one person familiar with the exchange, was described as deeply uncomfortable. Staff were walking on glass. Nobody wanted to be the person who explained that every assumption in the original plan had been wrong. According to diplomatic sources in Brussels, the administration reached out to European allies on day 3 to ask whether they would issue a joint statement supporting the strikes. The answer from Germany, France, and the United Kingdom was, in diplomatic language, a polite but clear refusal. America had launched this war without consulting its NATO partners. Now it was asking those same partners to provide political cover for a conflict that was already looking far messier than advertised. The most revealing moment came on day 7. As the president was finishing a briefing on the status of the operation, the aides in the room reportedly heard him ask quietly, almost to himself, "Why aren't they breaking?" Nobody answered. According to one account, there was a full 12 seconds of silence in the Situation Room before someone changed the subject. That question, why is Iran not breaking, is the question that explains everything about what has gone wrong. Follow the doctrine, not the firepower. America's entire approach to this war was built on what military theorists call effects-based warfare. The theory is that if you destroy enough of an adversary's critical infrastructure, leadership, military hardware, economic capacity, the system stops functioning and the political will collapses. It worked in Iraq in 1991. It worked in Serbia in 1999. Pentagon planners assumed it would work in Iran. The Council on Foreign Relations put it plainly in their assessment published this week. This regime was never likely to capitulate in response to a direct attack. The Islamic Republic has been preoccupied with survival since 1979. It does not need to win militarily. It just needs to outlast American resolve. And outlasting American resolve has turned out to be far easier than anyone in Washington publicly admitted. This shifts power in a way that changes everything. For 30 years, America's military dominance meant that any country facing American firepower had two choices: surrender or be destroyed. Iran has introduced a third option: absorb the hits, keep functioning, impose costs, and wait for domestic American politics to make continued war unsustainable. That third option now exists on the record, documented, proven in real time for every government in the world to study. The legal consequences are already arriving. 3 separate congressional investigations have been opened into the legality of the strikes under the War Powers Act. Legal scholars at Georgetown and Yale have published analyses arguing that launching strikes against a country during active negotiations, which is exactly what happened on February 28th, may constitute a violation of established international law frameworks. Former State Department legal advisors have gone on record saying the administration's war powers justification was, in their words, extraordinarily thin. The power has shifted from American military supremacy as the decisive factor in Middle East affairs to a new reality where Iranian asymmetric doctrine, combined with Chinese economic support, Russian diplomatic cover at the UN Security Council, and the sheer geographic complexity of the region, neutralizes the traditional American advantage. America brought overwhelming force. Iran brought a doctrine designed specifically to survive overwhelming force, and doctrine won. Here is the domino effect that is now falling piece by piece, and it matters for every person watching this. If Iran can absorb the full military force of the United States and Israel simultaneously, sustain operations across 4 fronts, close the Strait of Hormuz, and still be negotiating from a position where it has not formally surrendered, then every country that America has threatened with military action in the last 20 years now has a new strategic model to study. If Iran can do it, others will try to replicate it. The deterrent value of American military power has just been measurably reduced. The geopolitical observers have already drawn their conclusions. China watched this conflict and quietly accelerated its military planning cycles. Russia used the moment to advance positions in Syria, where American attention had been diverted. Japan and South Korea went on record expressing alarm that American military assets had been pulled toward the Middle East and away from the Pacific, the region America's own national security strategy from November 2025 identified as the priority. The Taiwan contingency planners in both Washington and Beijing are running new calculations. Where are America's closest allies right now? Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, the Gulf states that hosted American military bases, that were struck by Iranian missiles because of their association with American operations, have not issued a single public statement endorsing American strategy. Not one. The countries that were physically hit in this conflict because of their alliance with America are quietly opening new economic and security conversations with Beijing. That is not the behavior of allies who feel protected. Inside America's own political coalition, the fracture is becoming impossible to ignore. On one side are the hawks, who said maximum pressure plus military force would deliver regime change within weeks. On the other side is a growing bipartisan group, Republicans and Democrats, pointing to the $2.7 billion in munitions, the $1 billion against the Houthis alone, the 4-front war, the school bombing that killed 170 people in Minab, and asking what exactly was achieved that could not have been achieved through the negotiations that were abandoned on February 28th. That fracture does not heal. It deepens as the costs mount. Reports from people close to the inner circle describe a president who is consuming intelligence briefings at an unusual rate, who is dismissing advisors who raise uncomfortable assessments, and who is privately focused on a single question above all others: how do we frame the exit as a win? Staff are carefully managing the information that reaches the Oval Office. The gap between the public confidence and the private uncertainty is, according to one source, wider than at any point in this administration. There is an image from the city of Minab in southern Iran that tells the entire story of this war in a single frame. A grieving man standing in the rubble of the Shajareh-Tayyibeh Girls' Elementary School. 165 people killed in a single strike, mostly young children, Tomahawk missile debris identified at the scene by independent analysts. The United States said it was investigating. The investigation has not concluded. The image has circled the globe 400 million times on social media in 11 languages. You can control a press conference. You cannot control a photograph. You can spin a policy objective. You cannot spin 165 dead schoolchildren with American missile fragments in the rubble. Reality always catches up. And in this war, reality has been catching up faster than any White House communications team can manage. Every empire eventually reaches the moment when the gap between its self-image and its actual position in the world becomes visible to everyone simultaneously. Britain reached it at Suez in 1956 when it launched a military operation and then had to retreat because the economic and political cost was unsustainable. The Soviet Union reached it in Afghanistan in 1989. Rome reached it across the Euphrates when it discovered that military supremacy beyond a certain geographic point becomes logistically impossible to sustain. America is reaching it now, not because it lost a battle and not because Iran won one, but because Iran demonstrated something more enduring than a battlefield outcome. Iran demonstrated that a country with a GDP smaller than the state of Texas, under maximum economic sanctions, with a devastated proxy network, and under simultaneous military assault from the most powerful military alliance in history, can still set the terms of its own survival. That demonstration has changed the strategic calculations of every mid-sized power on Earth. So where does this go from here? The 14-day ceasefire is fragile. The nuclear question is unresolved. Iran still has enriched uranium in an underground facility that survived the bombing. The enrichment capability, damaged but not destroyed, can be rebuilt. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, enters his leadership having watched his country absorb the full force of American military power and survive. He does not negotiate from a position of weakness. He negotiates from the position of a country that proved something the entire world is now discussing. As we move into the next phase of negotiations, expect America to push hard for a framework that can be packaged domestically as a victory. Denuclearization language, some form of missile limitation, a timeline for lifting the blockade. Expect Iran to push back on every condition that looks like formal surrender. Expect China to remain the only actor that both sides trust enough to mediate. And expect the Gulf states, the ones whose infrastructure was hit, whose civilians were disrupted, whose economies were shaken, to quietly begin hedging their security relationships in ways that will take years to fully become visible, but are already underway. Watch what happens in the next 72 hours. The ceasefire clock is running. The nuclear inspectors have not been allowed back in. The Strait is still not fully open to all nations. And the question that began this entire conflict, does America still have the power to dictate outcomes in the Middle East, has received an answer that no administration talking point can erase. Subscribe right now and stay close, because we will go live the moment the ceasefire status changes. If the talks break down, we will break it down with you in real time. If a deal is reached, we will tell you exactly what Iran got and what America gave up. History is not waiting. Neither should you. Stay close. Watch everything. The next move decides the next decade.